My life has always been relatively stable, or so I thought until recent events started unfolding, cascading into chaos. I'm Mary Smith, an office worker for a company run by my father. I had a somewhat picturesque life with a supportive family, my mother, a homemaker, who had a knack for sewing and made most of my clothes during my childhood. It was a typical evening at home when my mother-in-law burst into our house, her face etched with determination and a hint of desperation. "I want a divorce, and I want you out," she declared abruptly to my husband, David. The room fell silent as we processed her words. David's gaze shifted to the floor, a bewildered expression overtaking his features. Beside me, Emily, whom I only knew as David's colleague, seemed oddly moved by the declaration. I stood there, taken aback, not only by her words, but by the commanding tone she used. It was as if she was orchestrating a scene from a drama, expecting us to play our parts without question. Ignoring the tension, I focused on what needed to be done. "Here are the divorce papers," I said, maintaining a calm demeanor as I handed them to David. I had preemptively filled out my part, anticipating complications given the sudden upheaval in our lives. As if the night needed more intensity, I pulled out a promissory note, addressing my mother-in-law firmly, "And here's what you'll be taking care of." She looked at me, her face a mix of confusion and anger. "You expect me to pay for his debts?" With a small, resigned smile, I shook my head. "It's not just any debt. It's his, after all," I countered, hinting at deeper issues that had been simmering beneath our family's surface for a while. The air thickened with unspoken words and secrets just as the doorbell rang, slicing through the tension. The people who stepped in were the last straw that would undoubtedly send our already precarious situation into a downward spiral. It was Jennifer and Mike, my lifelong friend, and her detective husband, both looking concerned and carrying an air of urgency. David and my mother-in-law paled at their arrival, sensing that the unraveling threads of our family tapestry were about to be pulled even further. Jennifer, always one to sense injustice and step in, had a solemn look on her face, a clear indication that she was here not just as a friend but in her professional capacity as a lawyer. In the backdrop of this family drama, I often reminisced about the simpler times, the dresses my mother sewed for me, the college days when I first met David, and the innocent dreams we shared. Those memories seemed like fragments of another lifetime, starkly contrasting with the current turmoil. As Jennifer and Mike stepped in, ready to navigate the legal and emotional maze that awaited, I braced myself for what was to come. The night was far from over, and the truths that were about to be revealed would change our family forever. Living with David's family dynamics has been a roller coaster. My mother-in-law, though she means well, often oversteps boundaries, leading to tensions that even David finds hard to navigate. Each time her behavior would cause a stir, David's father would step in, always gentle but firm, issuing apologies that felt sincere yet weighed down by repetition. "I'm really sorry, Mary. I'll make sure to talk to her," he'd say, his eyes reflecting a mix of embarrassment and resolve. David would echo his sentiments, "I'm truly sorry, Mary." Their apologies, genuine as they were, became a regular occurrence, a ritual that followed every outburst from his mother. It was exhausting, yet I decided to let it go this time, recognizing their efforts to maintain peace. David had once mentioned his brother in passing, a topic he seldom revisited. His brother had left home right after high school due to constant clashes with their mother, and he hadn't returned since. David believed his mother's overbearing nature and her quickness to suggest divorce at any sign of conflict were key reasons his brother distanced himself. It seemed that fear of losing another son made her cling even more tightly to David, her remaining child. The constant pressure about when we would have children only added to the strain. My mother-in-law's insistence was relentless, and though I shared her desire for grandchildren, the situation was more complex. After numerous nagging sessions, I had gone for medical checkups, which showed no issues on my part. It was becoming clear that perhaps David should also be checked. One day, I convinced a reluctant David to visit the hospital. As we awaited the results, we promised each other to stay united regardless of the outcome. Fortunately, my father-in-law had been more assertive recently in keeping my mother-in-law's behavior in check, which brought a much-needed calm to our daily lives. I was profoundly grateful for his efforts. Without him, our marriage might have faced more serious challenges. Then, amidst this fragile peace, a disturbing element was introduced. I found an anonymous letter in our mailbox, stark and unsettling, with a message bluntly advising me to break up with David. Shaken, I showed it to him immediately. Could it be a prank? I wondered aloud, my voice laced with concern. Maybe, but doesn't it give you the creeps? David replied, visibly disturbed by the anonymous threat. Following his advice, I reached out to Jennifer, who had become a lawyer and a confidant over the years. She agreed to meet and discuss the matter further. Arriving at the cafe for our meeting, I found Jennifer, her husband Mike, and another man waiting. Jennifer quickly introduced him. This is Liam Brown, he works with Mike as a detective. Liam greeted me warmly, extending a hand which I shook, trying to mask the anxiety that the letter had stirred in me. After the introductions, we settled in to discuss the mysterious message, hoping to unravel its origins and intent with Liam's expert help. The tension in the cafe was palpable as I pulled the unsettling letter from my purse and handed it to Jennifer, Mike, and their colleague, Liam. What's this? No sender? Mike noted with a furrowed brow, implying that someone must have slipped it directly into my mailbox, a distinctly malicious act. Both Jennifer and Mike's expressions darkened upon seeing the letter, while Liam, his eyes narrowing, seemed lost in thought. Is something wrong? I asked, noticing Liam's intense focus. Well, this handwriting looks familiar, he murmured, more to himself than to us. At Mike's prompt, Liam added, it might be someone you know. The thought sent a chill down my spine. We agreed that it would be best for Liam and Mike to take over the investigation, while Jennifer offered some legal advice on how to proceed with potential threats. With the day turning heavy with implications, we decided to wrap up and go our separate ways. Returning home, I was surprised to find David there. Welcome back, David. What are you doing here? I hadn't expected him to be home so early, especially on a weekday. Did you find out anything? He asked immediately, skipping any greetings. No, we couldn't figure out much from just that letter, I replied, shaking my head. David suggested, maybe you should go to your parents' house for safety. Whoever did this could escalate things. I observed David as he spoke. He was visibly worried about me, but his eyes darted around nervously, which only served to heighten my own unease. I'll think about it, I said cautiously. But why are you home, David? It's a weekday. I was so worried, I couldn't focus on work, he explained, yet his avoidance of my gaze was unsettling. It reminded me of a previous big fight we had. He had acted similarly evasive when I pressed him for answers. Deciding to keep a watchful eye on the situation, I informed my father-in-law about everything, but made sure my mother-in-law remained unaware. The letters, however, continued to arrive, each more threatening than the last, with messages that grew increasingly hostile. Break up with him quickly, just leave, you're a nuisance, you don't deserve David, I'll force you out if necessary. Taking no chances, I photographed each letter and reported them to Jennifer. I also confided in my father. Dad, I need your help with something, asking for his and my mother's discreet support while trying to maintain normalcy at work and home. But the strain was evident. I found myself staying later at work, while David frequently left the office before me, his whereabouts increasingly mysterious. One evening, David wasn't home when I arrived. Waiting anxiously for his return, I rehearsed what I would say. Hours later, he finally walked through the door. I'm home. Welcome back, he said, his arrival much later than mine and his eyes avoiding mine, which only deepened my suspicions of something unpleasant brewing. As I sighed to mask my growing irritation, a deeply sad event unfolded. My father-in-law, who had been a stabilizing force throughout the recent chaos, passed away. The loss felt like a turning point, leaving me to navigate the ensuing emotional and familial turmoil without his wise counsel. The loss of my father-in-law was a profound shock. He had been ill for some time, and despite the best efforts of his doctors, he passed away. I found myself visiting him almost daily during his illness, and the night he died, I was overcome with grief, shedding tears alone while it seemed I was the only one so deeply affected by his departure. In the days that followed, the responsibility of handling the funeral arrangements unexpectedly fell on me. "Mary can handle it," David and my mother-in-law nonchalantly decided among themselves, their conversation quickly turning to the matter of the inheritance. They seemed almost eager, smiling as they speculated on the possible financial benefits that might come their way. Meanwhile, they left me to sort through his belongings, showing little interest in the sentimental value of his life's accumulations. While going through his personal effects, particularly his diary, I stumbled upon something startling, something that I felt needed immediate attention. I gathered these papers, a mix of personal notes and something that seemed legally significant, and took them to Jennifer, who had become not just a friend but a crucial legal advisor. My father-in-law had truly cared for me until the end, and discovering these documents only deepened my sense of loyalty and determination to honor his memory correctly. Motivated by this, I began to work quietly behind the scenes, planning my next steps during this turbulent time. It wasn't long after the funeral that another unexpected event occurred. I was at home when my mother-in-law arrived, accompanied by a familiar face, Emily, David's ex-girlfriend. The moment was awkward, to say the least. "You are, it's been a while," I said, recognizing her immediately. Emily had once tried to assert dominance over me when David and I began dating in college. Their brief attempt to rekindle something had ended with David rejecting her, and since then, there had been no contact. "Why are you two here?" I asked, genuinely surprised by their visit. David, who appeared just as shocked to see them, was silent. "Actually, I'm dating David now," Emily announced abruptly, her words hanging in the air like a heavy mist. "What are you talking about?" I managed to reply, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. That's when Emily dropped another bombshell: "I'm pregnant with David's child." David turned pale, his expression one of someone caught in a lie, scrambling to formulate an explanation. "No, Mary, this isn't what it seems," he stammered, but I remained completely calm, my earlier preparations having steeled me for just such a betrayal. "So what do you want?" I asked Emily in a cold, controlled voice, which made her flinch. It was then my mother-in-law chose to make her dramatic announcement: "My son got his ex-girlfriend pregnant. He's moving in with her, so I want a divorce and for you to get out." The reactions to her announcement were varied, but I stood firm, the documents I'd found earlier now feeling like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, ready to reshape the future. Amid the turmoil and surprise confessions, I found myself standing in the eye of a personal storm. As my mother-in-law declared the unexpected news of David's infidelity and the consequential familial upheaval, I was surprisingly calm, fortified by my prior discoveries and preparations. David, however, looked away, bewildered by the sudden exposure of his secrets, while Emily, his mistress, seemed oddly touched by the situation, perhaps seeing it as her victory. Ignoring David's attempts to interject, I calmly walked over to my desk to retrieve the documents I had prepared. Returning to the living room, I faced them with a smile and handed over the filled-out divorce papers. "I'm counting on you to take care of my husband's debts," I announced, ensuring my tone carried both resolve and a hint of irony. My mother-in-law, still trying to dominate the conversation, commanded, "What you should pay for that." I merely smiled and shook my head, indicating the impossibility of her demand. "Impossible, it's my husband's debt after all," I retorted, then revealed the truth about the origins of the debt, a consequence of David's past and ongoing indiscretions. David had a history of cheating, previously involving a married woman, which had resulted in a hefty demand for compensation by her husband. His lavish spending on his mistresses had depleted our savings, compelling him to accrue substantial debts. Despite his pleading, claiming his undying love and desire not to separate, I had decided to secure my financial independence first. "Mary, you're the only one for me, I truly love you from the bottom of my heart," he had once said, but his actions spoke differently. I reminded them coldly, "I've been covering our living expenses, and you might have forgotten, but this property was originally my father's, and I bought it with my savings. So, if anyone should leave, it's David, not me." At that moment, I pulled out a photo and placed it on the table. It was a picture of David and Emily, walking arm in arm, captured recently. "You knew?" David stammered, his voice a mix of shock and fear. "Yes, I knew," I confirmed. This photo was taken by Mike and his investigative team, whom I had also tasked with looking into David's infidelities, apart from investigating the threatening letters. Furthermore, I presented copies of correspondence between my mother-in-law and Emily. These documents, found tucked inside my late father-in-law's diary, revealed that not only was Emily having an affair with David, but my mother-in-law was actively supporting it. "How did you get this?" my mother-in-law gasped, her face draining of color. "He knew about David's affair and that you were helping, so he left this as evidence," I explained, the words making both my mother-in-law and David turn paler, "if possible. I will divorce, but I won't give up this house, and I'll demand substantial compensation." "Looks like more debt for you both," I declared firmly, my resolve unwavering. Just then, the doorbell rang, cutting through the tense atmosphere. The people who were about to enter were Jennifer and her team. "I've been waiting for you, Jennifer," I said, ready to take the next steps in this unfolding drama, armed with truth and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As Jennifer and her team entered, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. I had contacted Jennifer immediately when my in-laws showed up, knowing that things could quickly spiral out of control. Emily, upon seeing Liam, turned noticeably pale. It had been years since they had seen each other. Liam, with a slight smile tinged with irony, greeted her, "Finally found you, Emily." It was a shock to everyone when Liam then turned to David, saying, "Can't believe it, you're my brother. Long time no see." I hadn't known this, but Liam was the brother David had spoken about, the one who had a strained relationship with our mother-in-law and had left home right after high school. Their reunion was anything but warm. Liam's expression hardened as he looked at David and our mother-in-law. "You always liked hurting people," he remarked coldly. Then, turning to me, he said, "Let's go," and gently pushed me towards the door. As we were leaving, Liam issued a stern ultimatum to David and my mother-in-law, "You have 1 week to pack up and leave, otherwise I'll sue." I left the house with only the essentials, my mind swirling with the rapid developments. Before stepping out completely, I turned back to David and dropped a bombshell that stunned everyone in the room. "How did you get her pregnant when you're infertile?" The silence that followed was palpable, their shocked expressions marking the gravity of the revelation. With Liam and Jennifer, I headed to my parents' house. Upon arrival, my parents embraced me, already aware of the tumultuous events. "That was tough. Take it easy now, you can rest here," my mom comforted me as we sat down to discuss the next steps. The conversation inevitably circled back to David's infertility, a fact I had discovered from the hospital test results prior to the chaotic developments of the threatening letters and my father-in-law's funeral. It was a piece of information I hadn't had the chance to share with David due to the ongoing turmoil. "The child Emily is carrying isn't David's," I mused aloud, and everyone nodded. "And since Liam and Emily have been divorced for over a year, it's not his child either." It seemed like Emily and David, both prone to deceit, were indeed a match made in their own peculiar heaven. In the midst of our conversation, I noticed my phone buzzing incessantly. It had been on silent mode, but now I saw dozens of missed calls and messages from David and my mother-in-law, all begging me to return and talk. "Are they contacting you?" "Show me," my dad said, his voice firm. I handed him my phone with a stern expression. Just then, David called again. Without hesitation, my father pressed the answer button, and thinking I had picked up, David immediately started speaking. "Mary, explain everything, what's going on?" His voice was desperate, his main concern clear as he blurted out, "What do you mean I'm infertile?" The room fell silent, every frown deepening at his words. David continued to plead, his voice filled with desperation, not yet understanding the full extent of the revelations and their implications. Standing in the living room of my parents' house, the phone conversation with David still echoed through the tense air. His desperate plea to remain employed at the company, revealing his vulnerability and desperation, added another layer of disillusionment to my already strained feelings. As he implored, Emily cut in abruptly, her voice sharp and accusing, revealing her true motives for choosing David. So I chose him to be the father of my child because he told me he was going to be the next company president. But this makes no sense now. Does that mean the child isn't mine? You're infertile, right? The confusion and accusation in her tone were palpable. The call devolved into a loud argument between David and Emily, their conflict clear even through the phone. Amid their bickering, I heard my mother-in-law's voice try to intervene, which only added to the chaos. Then, my mother, having quietly observed the unfolding drama, took the phone from my father. "Hello, long time no see," she said calmly. My mother-in-law, surprised to hear my mother's voice, responded with deference, suddenly respectful. "Please don't call me teacher anymore. I don't want someone like you as my student anymore," my mother stated firmly, cutting off any pretense of cordiality given the circumstances. The shock in my mother-in-law's voice was evident as she screamed, a sign of her great respect for my mother. With a simple, decisive gesture, my mother ended the call and handed the phone back to me. "Well, I guess it's time for us to leave, right? Leave everything to me, Mary. We'll make sure you get a good settlement from the divorce," Jennifer said, her tone supportive yet firm as she prepared to leave with Mike. Liam lingered for a moment, his expression serious. "Mary, please read this later," he said, handing me a letter before following Jennifer out the door. I watched them leave, then turned my attention to the letter Liam had given me. Opening it, I found it filled with his personal feelings for me, which stirred unexpected emotions within me. My mother, ever observant, laughed softly as she peered over my shoulder at the letter. Well, not bad at all," she commented, while my father smiled warmly at our reaction. A week later, I returned to the house with Liam. "Mary, you came back," David exclaimed, a mix of hope and desperation in his voice. "Stop joking. I'm just here to collect my personal belongings," I responded coldly, determined to keep my distance. David still lingered in the house, clinging to false hope, as did my mother-in-law. They seemed to be squatting there, unwilling or unable to move on. I glared at David, frustration mounting. "Didn't Jennifer tell you? Leave this house as soon as possible," I reiterated firmly, echoing Liam's earlier ultimatum. It was clear that whatever ties we had were now severed, and it was time for them to accept the consequences of their actions. Thanks to Jennifer's meticulous legal assistance, the divorce had been finalized swiftly and without complications. Moreover, both David and his mother were required to vacate the house, which would be put up for sale within a month. As I returned to collect my belongings, David attempted to approach me, his face a mixture of desperation and disbelief. "But can't you reconsider?" he pleaded. "Don't come near her," Liam interjected firmly, pulling me close and shielding me from David. This protective gesture only intensified David's agitation, his face contorting with frustration. "You had an affair after blaming me so much," David accused, his voice thick with accusation. "Unfortunately, we're not dating yet," I corrected him calmly, glancing at Liam. I then turned to Liam and added, "Well, I plan to answer him, really." "Oh, I'm so happy," Liam responded with a genuine smile, clearly relieved and perhaps hopeful about our future interaction. At that moment, my mother-in-law interjected bitterly, "How awful, poor David. You wanted this from the start, didn't you?" Her words dripped with accusation and disappointment. I met her gaze steadily, and she fell silent, perhaps recalling how she had persistently urged me to divorce David. "It seems Emily is more to your liking," I remarked coolly, watching as she looked away, her demeanor mirroring her son's when confronted with the uncomfortable truth of their actions. "Oh, and by the way," I continued, shifting the conversation to another critical matter, "Jennifer has the will left by my father-in-law. We're opening it tomorrow, so please be at the specified place." The tone of finality in my voice marked the end of my tasks for the day. The next day at Jennifer's office, the contents of my father-in-law's will were revealed. The inheritance was left entirely to Liam and me. David's share was considered a pre-death gift, used to offset his debts, specifically the compensation paid by my father-in-law for David's first affair, which had been treated as a debt David was repaying. Furthermore, since my mother-in-law had been having an affair herself and had divorced shortly before his death, she had no right to claim anything from the estate. The will explicitly stated that the inheritance was left to Mr. Liam and Ms. Mary, who have suffered a lot because of this and been troubled by David. This is ridiculous, this is wrong. Why the hell do my brother, who left, and a stranger like Mary get it? David exploded, his voice laced with outrage and disbelief. His fury was met with a sharp rebuke from Liam, who had endured enough. Enough, Liam exclaimed, his voice commanding silence. He then unleashed his pent-up feelings on their mother, recounting his own grievances. Who wouldn't want to run away from a place like that? I was basically always neglected. They wouldn't let me go to the school I wanted and took away all my earnings from part-time jobs. The room fell silent, the weight of Liam's words hanging heavily in the air, a poignant reminder of the deep fractures within the family that had long been ignored. As the stark reality of his family's history and his own precarious situation became evident, David stood in the middle of Jennifer's office, his expression one of utter shock and disbelief. His world, once filled with aspirations and presumptions of privilege, had crumbled spectacularly. Liam's revelations had laid bare the deeply dysfunctional dynamics that had favored David at the expense of others. My mother-in-law averted her eyes at Liam's words, I recounted, reflecting on the recent confrontation. All because I wouldn't listen to you, that's ridiculous. Her notion of not listening involved imposing household chores on Liam, even to the extent of interrupting his studies, while she herself neglected these duties under the guise of being a housewife. In stark contrast, David was allowed the freedom to study and play, a liberty not afforded to his brother. That's probably because David is the child of an affair partner, Liam had exclaimed in a moment of raw disclosure, shocking everyone, especially David, who had never imagined such a secret lurking in his family's closet. That's precisely why I can't forgive you, and I can't let Dad's precious inheritance go to you, Liam declared, his voice resolute, leaving his mother with slumped shoulders and a defeated gaze. David's career had unraveled as swiftly as his personal life. Previously boasting about his imminent rise to CEO due to his familial ties, his misconduct had finally caught up with him. Notorious for making advances on female employees, his dismissal came after multiple complaints from colleagues. The intricate web of his affairs and professional missteps, including his liaisons during work hours, particularly with Emily, had all come to light. David was fired, couldn't inherit anything, and now lives in poverty due to the debt incurred from paying me alimony, I explained to Liam, who listened intently. Despite the tumultuous events, David's mother continued her affairs, showing little regard for the dire circumstances. Eventually, unable to tolerate her behavior and the additional strain it placed on his dwindling resources, David was forced to kick her out. Meanwhile, Mike had taken the initiative to delve deeper into Emily's background. It turned out that she had been staying at her parents' house. Armed with this information and a frank narrative of recent events, Liam visited Emily's parents. His straightforward explanation led them to take drastic but necessary actions. They decided to take custody of the child and expel Emily from their home, promising to raise the child themselves and hold Emily accountable for her actions. Liam mentioned that her parents were reasonable people, I reflected, appreciating the irony of Emily's situation. Her own deception and manipulations had ultimately alienated her from her last refuge. The complexities of these intertwined lives had led to a series of dramatic unravelings, each precipitated by the other's actions, painting a vivid picture of a family caught in a web of deceit, betrayal, and eventual redemption through harsh truths. After the tumultuous events that led to my divorce and the disintegration of David's immediate family, life seemed to gradually return to some semblance of normality for me, if not for them. One day, a letter arrived from David, an attempt at an apology and an explanation of his recent misfortunes. He detailed how after being rejected by Emily and a disastrous confrontation with his mother, which had involved the police, he had become an outcast in his apartment complex. This ostracism had forced him to relocate to the countryside. Well, it's too late now, I muttered as I tore up the letter. My life had moved on, and I had little time or emotional bandwidth to devote to David's ongoing saga. Now back in the swing of my own busy life, I was starting anew in a different department at the company. Interestingly, I had been the original candidate for the next president, not David. This period of rotating through various departments was designed to give me a better understanding of the company before I settled into a formal position. Things were also looking up in my personal life. Liam and I had started living together in a new home, conveniently located near his detective office. Unlike David, Liam was often home before me, preparing dinner and greeting me with a warm smile each evening, a small gesture that meant the world to me. I was incredibly grateful for him every day. Mike had once told me about how hard Liam worked after leaving home and the toll his experiences with Emily had taken on him. Knowing his past hardships made me appreciate his resilience and the peaceful stability we now shared even more. Liam's ability to empathize with my past betrayals by David and his family had deepened our connection. It was my turn to be there for him as we both navigated the aftermath of our respective ordeals. As I contemplated how much we had been through together and how we should continue to support each other, Liam echoed my thoughts one evening, prompting a heartfelt laugh from me. "I was just thinking the same," I said, and when I shared this with him, he smiled, his eyes lighting up with affection and understanding, saying, "Is that so?" Later, through the grapevine, I heard more unfortunate news about Emily and David's mother. Emily had been caught by debt collectors and taken away due to her inability to manage her financial obligations. David's mother, now alone and destitute, was recently seen sheltering from the elements in a park, her belongings reduced to what could be carried in cardboard boxes. These tragic turn of events served as a stark reminder of how drastically life could change and solidified my resolve to cherish and nurture the new beginning I had forged with Liam. As I busied myself preparing to leave for my date with Liam, I couldn't help but reflect on the recent news about David. He had managed to stir up yet another affair scandal even in the countryside, and eventually, the relentless debt collectors had found him. Hidden away, he faced the consequences of his actions. "They got what they deserved," I muttered under my breath. It was a chapter of my life I was eager to close completely. I never want to deal with them again. Feeling a surge of gratitude for the stark contrast between my life and David's, I realized how fortunate I was. Maybe I should be thankful for the encounter with Liam, I thought as I grabbed my keys and headed out the door to meet him. Our date was wonderful, as always, and it wasn't long after that Liam proposed. We were at our favorite little spot, where the ambience was just perfect for such a moment. "I want to make you happy. Will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with emotion. "Yes, I'd love to." "I'll make you happy too," I responded, my heart overflowing with joy. We got married soon after in a simple yet profoundly meaningful ceremony, surrounded by those who truly mattered to us. Not long into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The realization that I could finally give my parents a grandchild filled me with an indescribable warmth. "Liam, you truly are a wonderful person," my father said one evening, his voice filled with pride and gratitude. That compliment brought tears to Liam's eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked, touching his arm gently. "Sorry, I just remembered my dad," Liam responded, his voice thick with emotion. My mother and I exchanged smiles, understanding the depth of his feelings. When I gave birth to our adorable son, Liam's involvement in household chores and child care was a great relief and brought us even closer. Our parents provided incredible support, enabling us to raise our son without the stress that so many other couples face. "I'm really happy right now," I confessed one quiet evening, cuddling with Liam on our couch. "Yeah, me too," Liam agreed, his smile mirroring mine. We looked at each other, our commitment to protect and nurture this newfound happiness evident in our eyes. As we sat there, enjoying the peaceful moment, I made a silent promise in my heart. Let's continue to protect this happiness, for our child and for ourselves. It was a vow to never take for granted the beautiful life we had built together, a life far removed from the chaos and betrayal